Hello, this is Pixel Freak, and I'm covering part 42 of the Final Fantasy Dimensions walkthrough. So we're back in the cave, doing the second piece of the same dungeon that we were covering earlier. And like I said before, this is a 2-boss dungeon. We already covered the first boss in part 41, and now we're moving on towards the second boss. It's going to wrap up this section for Sol and his team, and we'll flip back over to Noct at that point. Not a lot of exceptional enemies here. Got some vampires and stuff. There is some decent gear that you get in this particular dungeon. Unfortunately, I never actually used Phoenix. At least I haven't yet. I picked that up a couple pieces back. It's the summon for this particular section. But I never actually used Phoenix. I think it's because I moved on to start leveling up my Black Mage and my White Mage again. I capped out my levels for all my primary jobs at 20, and I started grinding towards the end of that. And probably in the next piece with Sol, I'll flip back to the Summoner and then grind my Summoner up a bit. I want to hit the 20 first with my Black Mage. So, back into the dungeon, or the Empire's base thing here. Now we have access to the elevator. That was what we did all the work in part 41 for. And I kind of move on to the next piece. Alright, so our objective has become clear. We have to blow up the ship, or at least that's what we're trying to do. There is a number of kind of little, I don't want to call them puzzles in this particular dungeon, but there's like a number of switches and stuff you gotta flip, and you gotta flip this one to open that one up. I don't want to call them puzzles because they're pretty simple. They don't even really need an explanation. You just watch how they operate and you'll kind of figure out as I'm doing it. And of course I gotta search everything looking for items and such. I want to cover as much as possible, even though I know that a lot of the stuff I'm coming up empty-handed. Just time burned, checking things that don't have anything in them. We have to bash it down. That reminds me of the beginning of the game when Noct, like, breaks down that wall. Noct is like, oh, dead end. I think I'll just go ahead and go right through the wall. Sol's just, we'll break it down. Alright, so we have activated some sort of defense mechanism. And now the fights begin. This particular section isn't too bad with the random encounters, but it is somewhat short. I mean, it's only about 10 minutes, and then at about that point, we're heading into the boss area. I think I'm going to go ahead and shut up until that point, so you'll hear my commentary pop back in when we get to the boss. Hey, Pixel Freak, and I'm back again. This is the boss for this particular dungeon. We're about to find out what the boss is. I should have named the robot Argy, just for fun. Come to daddy. So this is Dr. Luge, if you don't know who Dr. Luge is. And I know I mentioned this earlier in the walkthrough. Dr. Luge is actually a character out of Final Fantasy IV, the US 2. He was in the, I think it's called the Tower of Babel. And he, which is kind of funny because it's a biblical reference. But he made this Frankenstein robot thing. And then you actually have to fight the Frankenstein robot thing. And then he turns into a Frankenstein robot himself. And he's just this crazy doctor. Here, the name's being reused. And he does look kind of similar, but it's not the same character. It's very clearly not the same character. This guy is kind of amiable, I guess would be the best way to say it. He cares more for his work and the robot than he does about the nefarious acts of the Empire, which is kind of cool. I like those characters, characters that are working for the bad guys, but, you know, more or less are just being held hostage, I guess, by their love of what they do or their love of some element, right? The interesting thing about characters like that is that generally, even though you like them, because they're doing things for the bad side, they typically die in stories. A really good example is if you're a fan of The Walking Dead, and I'm going to throw out some spoilers here, so you might want to fast forward. The scientist guy from The Walking Dead, he actually was kind of this amiable guy, scientist guy. The scientist guy that was working for the good town, or for the, you know, the fake good town and the governor. He was kind of this amiable guy that really loved his work, and he was very curious, but seemed like a relatively good guy. Because he kind of did bad things, or at least worked for the wrong team, that was why he ended up dying. You kind of have this thing where a character has to die to true up for his actions. It's kind of a similar thing here. I don't know if this doctor is going to die, but I would expect him to. At some point in time, I would expect this character to die, just because he's working for the Empire. You know, he's doing bad things for the Empire, even though he's kind of a good guy. So it's kind of funny. They pin you against her, and they're like, okay, now you're gonna fight her. You're gonna fight the robot. And it's like she's way faster and way more powerful than she ever was when she was on your team, which is crazy. She is a pretty rough fight, though, and I really don't have any strategies for her. I just kind of went all out against her. There's no trick to beating her. There's no best way to do it. It's just react to what she does. For instance, I got a guy that's confused right now. Just smack him when they get confused and heal up when you get on low health. She just does a lot. And eventually the fight will end. Similar to that. So as it turns out, she's also a revenge robot, which is kind of cool. And she just body slammed Sid. Which I kind of like Sid as a bad guy too. I don't know if there was another Sid that was a bad guy. At least one's not coming to mind. If someone can think of one, put it in the comments. Because I can't think of one off the top of my head. They're usually like an old guy, or an uncle, or a dad, something like that. That's always, Final Fantasy X was an uncle. It was an old guy in 4. Yeah. Usually the Sid character is kind of like this mentor type person, or a guiding person. So if memory serves correctly, this is a fight that you just simply cannot lose. you basically just keep coming back to life over and over. So you should play the game that way. You end up at 0 and then just keep fighting. Don't waste your time healing. Just keep going offense. Basically, you're going to lose this character. She's going to die, as so many of your add-on characters have already had happen to them. Somebody around them has died. That happens to this character as well. If you're looking for any hint, the music. I think that music plays every time somebody dies. Alright, now you guys step in. And of course, once your team steps up, the enemy gets much weaker. It's kind of a cop-out if you ask me. I really don't like it when games do that, when they pin you against the... Excuse me. They pin you against the enemy in this kind of you can't win fight, and the enemy hits really, really hard, and then you get your primary team in there, and all of a sudden the enemy is much weaker for no apparent reason. Couple things. I might have mentioned that before. It's a pretty common mechanic in RPGs. They do it to try to tell a story, but I think it's a bad story mechanism. The enemy wouldn't get that weak just all of a sudden because their primary team arrived. I love that dropkick move. That's like the sweetest dropkick move, because that is not a dropkick. That is a pile driver. Someone needs to get their localization right. Omega boost. That's pretty cool. And of course, Droid gets nuked at the very end. With no music. There's no victory. This is not a victory. There you go. Some more dead character music. And that actually kind of finishes the story here. So that wraps up with a little bit of story here. We change teams, go back to Noct, and then we take over where Noct left off. I'm going to go ahead and end the commentary here. I'll see you on the next part, which is going to be part 43 with Noct's team. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, this has been Pixel Freak. you.